So this review is really going to be a different style to my previous reviews, despite being a review of Oblivion Remastered. As I've established beforehand, this will not be a retrospective of Oblivion, the game, or my eventual Tory Classic review of Oblivion. That I will some point do, but that's a long way down the road, to be honest. What this review will be is essentially the opposite of my Persona 3 Reload review, where I was reviewing Persona 3 Reload as Persona 3 as a fresh player, how I enjoyed it, was it good, and looking at those different aspects without looking at the changes from Persona 3 to Persona 3 Reload, because I wouldn't know. Oblivion is a game that I have put a good amount of hours into, not as much as Skyrim, but I would say 500 to 1,000 hours would be a conservative estimate. I'll be focusing on how good of a remaster the Oblivion Remastered is, and really focusing on what is good, not so good, what can be changed, etc. So without further ado, let's get into the review proper. So just getting into the visuals and overall aesthetic differences between Oblivion and Oblivion Remastered. Oblivion Remastered really shocked me with just the improvement to the overall graphical quality, especially in the world design and a world aesthetic overall. Just from this alone, you can make the comparison that this is closer to a remake than a remaster, with Virtuous Games remaking basically every model and character in the world, and having that dual engine approach where Unreal Engine 5 is acting as a renderer really helps overall perhaps make the game look exceedingly beautiful in that regard. There's still some questionable things here and there in terms of the character faces, for example. It's one of those issues where I think the human and elf faces still look kind of bad, but in an Oblivion kind of way. It's a part of the style of Oblivion. One issue that I could see if they went differently would be a huge worry I had originally, if you guys watched my short, and tried to Skyrimify Oblivion, as I call it. Oblivion and Skyrim are completely different games, with different aesthetics, different looks. Skyrim has this more rough, realistic, if you could say ugly aesthetic to it, with a lot of the characters, but for its time, it was a very good game graphical wise. Oblivion is similar in that regard, but for a different time. Oblivion characters look cartoonish in the original game when you go back to it nowadays, but it's not really what it was supposed to be, I feel. But that's what stuck and really makes Oblivion what it is, and that's a core theme I'm really going to be pushing in this review or impressions video, whatever you want to call it, is that there is things with Oblivion as a game that there are issues with, but as a remaster they can't really change without changing Oblivion as a game. What I will say is the Argonians and Khajiit, however, I thought got a really good touch-up improvement in terms of, in comparison to their original models. It really feels like in Oblivion originally, they were the ones with the short end of the stick, at least for me. They were always the ugliest race, along with the orcs, but in the remaster, they look, at least for me, really well done. Now, I mentioned how I was a bit worried with the lighting changes. The original Oblivion had this dreamlike, definitely distinct lighting, which at least in my view created this idyllic landscape of peace and beauty at times in Cyrodiil. You remember, this is why you fight, this is why you want to push back the forces of Oblivion, the contrasting hell and demonic Daedric forces of Mehrunes Dagon, who seek to conquer Tamriel and reshape the world in a cleansing fire. So while the remaster does lose a lot of this lighting, it's not as bad as I originally thought it would be, and there is already mods out there that fix this, so I can't really complain from that aspect. The UI is also something I had to kind of bite my tongue on, because while original Oblivion's UI had a lot of issues, especially with the inventory, you can definitely tell that the remaster does rectify that a lot, with a much larger focus on a PC friendly UI in comparison to both Skyrim and original Oblivion's UIs. It did still feel a bit overwhelming at first, and it is something I had to get used to, especially with the UI concerning the actual gameplay, not in menus, like the change to the resource bars like magicka, stamina and health being in a Skyrim way instead of the original 3 bars on the side, and the map being shifted from the bottom to the top to match Skyrim's aesthetic as well. For fans of Skyrim, I think this will be a welcome change. As someone who is used to being in kind of an Oblivion mode when I play Oblivion, felt a bit weird to adapt as well. What I will say is the extra layer of information in the menus is a welcome and good change. So what I mean is more explicitly telling the player what something does, which I feel original Oblivion struggles with telling new players what each thing does, apart from if you understand its menu scheme. What I do want to mention as a bit of a downside to the new graphics, at least for me, was at times, because everything is so much more detailed and there's a lot more static clutter on the ground in comparison to the original Oblivion, it can become a lot more difficult to discern what is a real item on the floor in comparison to original Oblivion, where there was just a bit of clutter and detail, so you could more easily see something that you could pick up, and you could discern that more easily than something that was just a part of the world. Kind of the new highlight thing that happens on items that you can pick up when you mouse over them is a help, for this, but I do wish at some point they do have a more long-term solution to help with this, as I feel that for accessibility purposes, if I sometimes struggle to see at points, I can imagine for some players who actually do have some sort of impairment could really have some issues. Finally, I do have to mention the new effects that they've put for spells and little enchantments. They do look very pretty, they're not hyper realistic, which is good. You can overall see the soul of the original effect over something that could be closer to Skyrim, like lightning effects don't look crazy detailed, fire as well, etc. So I have around 20 hours in the remaster, so it's not a crazy amount in comparison to Oblivion's actual length and playtime, which is around like 100 to 200 hours. For me personally, the reason why I'm doing this now is I can't bring myself to play Oblivion again for the whole summer, like what might happen. And I do have a lot of other games to play. That's partly why this isn't my Oblivion retrospective and I'm doing a review like this. But what I can say is there are minor things here and there that I found, like bugs that caused some stupid stuff to happen that never got fixed in the original Oblivion are now fixed in Oblivion Remastered. So that may restore some cut items, like the Spectre's ring in original Oblivion, which in the Imperial City, the Red Diamond ring shop is supposed to sell, but he was bugged out and you could never get that ring on Xbox 360 or PS3. Well, now he sells that ring. There is also some new dialogue, and to be honest, the new voices are relatively okay. I do think and I do wish that later on in the game they do keep some of the old voices to kind of vary the speech of the different races. Like for example, from what I've encountered, most of the Dunmer or Dark Elves are essentially voiced by the main Dark Elf guy from Skyrim, and the Wood Elves, from what I could see, are mostly voiced by the guy who voices the courier from Skyrim or Sven. Don't get me wrong, there may be a few from the original that are here and there that are really iconic, but it's really essentially a lot of new voice lines. There is also just a few to vary a little of the speech, which is nice. So not every Imperial Guard has the same voice now, which can be a downside. Now, I don't know if this is a bug, but I've also encountered some Oblivion gates before Kvatch, which, as somebody who regularly skips Kvatch until the late game, to my detriment perhaps, I thought I would have remembered being able to encounter an Oblivion gate before. If this is new or not, or if it's literally a bug, is too early to say for me, I think. The leveling system has also had a large overhaul, I would say. As I had said earlier in a short, Oblivion had a very distinct and rigid leveling system. You could only level up using your major skills. Your minor skills were there, but your class and making it or choosing it to an appropriate playstyle mattered a lot more than it does now. While major skills have a large effect on your XP when they increase, now it allows some more flexibility, as I said in the short. Or while now there is maybe some of that lost fun in working within a rigid system where you kind of messed up, but now it kind of forces you to play in a way you hadn't originally intended. The leveling system is much more forgiving. Also, the actual level up attribute stuff has changed. You now have virtues that allow you to put a certain amount of points in no matter how much you leveled up. I think in the old system, if I'm not wrong, had to do with what skills in particular you used to level up at that time, which gave a certain boost to attributes if you wanted to put points in them, but I might be misremembering. Now, of course, there is the origin system and the character creator. I think I do like that they've added, and apparently I didn't realize originally why they've done it, but it's because apparently the stat differences in male and female between the different races. Certain races, females, had stat differences to the males. So to even it out, you can choose to play as a different sub-race, basically in the origin, from whether you are a Stronghold Orc, for example, or a Orsinium Orc, a Cestrus Breton, or a High Rock Breton, a Colovian Imperial, or a Nibonese Imperial. You get it. A nice touch they've also added to the character creator is also the ability to have beards. Now, the astute among you may realize that in the original Oblivion, basically nobody had a beard except Sheogorath, but that beard is actually a part of his character model and sculpted into his face, which is a funny little fact, because I just imagined his beard is actually just made of skin instead of real hair. So if somebody tries to like shave, he just like cuts him or something. I don't know, it's just funny to me. Anyways, you can have a beard now. Now, there may be some more changes in the game that I'm just not aware of. This was more about new content and more like new changes. While there is some other changes to talk about, I'll save them for more dedicated sections. Now onto something that I think really does a disservice here, and one of the only two reasons I think somebody should wait to pick up the remaster, and that is the performance and bugs. Like, I know people have a laugh at the Bugthesda memes, but I don't know if it was just me and my playthrough, but this is absolutely the buggiest non-modded playthrough I've ever done of any game of this. Take that as you will, because some bugs are charming, they add to the hilarity a bit, and you don't really think of it beyond just a few seconds, like Porkchop being outside of his cage, or the blue team's gladiator in the arena being naked or not naked. Then you have bugs which are a bit worse here, which is actually funny, because I don't know if they fixed the Skull of Corruption exploit, but the Skull of Corruption, at least for me, now just creates a naked clone instead of a full armored clone. I was really trying my best to discern if they tried to fix it, or if a bug actually broke the exploit. Then there is just kind of unacceptable bugs. Now these are bugs that are quest breaking, game breaking, and overall gameplay ruining bugs. For example, I luckily didn't find anything in the game that was game breaking for me, apart from some nasty set of crashes in Oblivion that would just close the game. Oblivion is a very old style of game, by the way, so that means you are subject to good old infinite death glitches if you aren't careful enough with saves, which is just a general warning. You most likely don't have any guardrails other than a few more autosaves, which may be enough to mitigate the damage of getting in such a cycle. But also for the Vermina quest, the hatch to the end of the dungeon is supposed to be hidden, but it's not. So you can just get in the hatch and there's the quest item, the Orb of Vermina, and you miss out on a pretty cool Daedric artifact quest by skipping to the end. While I knew what was supposed to happen and it wasn't supposed to be that quick, this could be really bad for new players as they don't know what exactly the quest has you do. So me finishing it in 3 minutes felt weird. Then there is a new glitch in the Kavach side quest where you take Kavach back from the Daedra. The guy who's supposed to help you just stops and doesn't continue the quest. So the quest stage here is bugged, and while you can finish the quest, you need to know that you're supposed to get the Count's ring, because if you didn't, you would just think that quest is permanently broken and unfixable. Performance here is also a big issue, but I think that's kind of to be expected with Unreal Engine 5. The stutters that are typical in most Unreal Engine 5 games are here, along with, as I said, some crashes and really big performance dips. I feel I played the game on Xbox Series X and it even just got really bad in the Oblivion gates for me, that sometimes after doing an Oblivion gate I had just had to end stream and then lay down for a few minutes before continuing. These, however, are things I hopefully can see patched out throughout the next few months or weeks if Bethesda or Virtuous are proactive in catching, and hopefully they have a lot of reporting by the community. Otherwise I could really see this having a negative effect in the perception of the remaster. So in terms of what you can just feel in combat and generally in gameplay, now there is an actual third person mode. I've played around with it a bit, and yeah, you could 100% play the whole game like this if you wanted to now, where in the original really isn't meant to be played in third person. The mode just exists to exist. The combat also has a punchier feeling to it. It's not Dying Light level of first person melee combat, but it's certainly better than the original. The stuff feels like it has extra weight now when you strike. The effects, both sound and visual, add that extra kick that original Oblivion's combat could never deliver. There is definitely some balancing now in terms of combat, and especially when you fight certain enemies. Again, I haven't played it to the breaking point where, like how in original Oblivion, if you got to a certain level, there was a time that you just couldn't kill anything because everything felt too strong, or you didn't get as powerful enough as you leveled up. You can definitely tell that it's not the original, where also loot tables have been balanced better, where you start getting some of the better armor and weapon varieties earlier. So I got to level 10 or 11 and I started getting a few glass pieces during a few dungeons, which I believe they're supposed to start dropping in original Oblivion around level 15. A change that I think is also really nice is the seamless integration of the DLCs. As we know, the Oblivion Remastered comes with all the DLCs the original game came with. But an issue I always had in the original game when starting is that 95% of the DLCs would just pop or start as soon as you leave the Imperial sewers, or even just after choosing a class. It's really immersion breaking, so I like how at least they've integrated the DLCs so they appear more like side quests. I remember in the background I heard a few NPCs talking about Frostcrag Spire, and then it appeared on my map as a marker, for example. Of course you can't neglect the sprinting. Now, apart from the really goofy animation, it is something I actually didn't realize I needed. I think it's really nice. It's a little slow, I might add, but again, it's one of those things that you could easily go wrong with if it was too fast. The Oblivion Remastered hasn't hasn't changed the game enough to be that fast, if that makes sense. Now in terms of other stuff, just to mention, I will talk about there's more wildlife and more fish in the water, insects, etc., which is a small but nice change. Sneaking and getting a headshot that also does more damage, which might be confusing, but what Oblivion didn't have, like Skyrim, is more damage if you do a headshot. So hitting an enemy anywhere on the body did the same damage, so there was no incentive before to get a headshot, where now there is. Now, remember what I said earlier when it came to two things that would stop me recommending the remaster right now? This is the second one. In original Oblivion, you had a difficulty slider to dictate the difficulty. Now, I agree generally that this was not a good system because it's not a naturally good, set point that we want people to play at, and a dictating of the difficulty to give a more consistent feeling. So I'm not opposed to the way they've done it now and the way they do it in Skyrim, with the novice, apprentice, adept, expert, master, etc. My issue comes from the stat modifiers for each. So adept is normal, where you have a 1 times multiplier, so you do 1 times normal damage and take 1 times normal damage. But the jump to expert makes it go from that to you now do 0.6 damage dealt and times 3 damage taken, which is really too much of a jump and feels terrible. It feels like adept is too easy, expert is too hard or punishing. Like, I feel like there should be a difficulty between expert and adept, because for a player like me, especially early on, adept was that too easy, and don't even mention lower like novice and apprentice, that was like joke level. But I think expert, and I don't even have to mention master, with its 0.2 damage dealt multiplier and times 6 damage taken multiplier. So either a rebalancing of expert is in order, or a shift with everything, where master becomes a legendary difficulty like Skyrim, expert becomes master, and there is a new expert like maybe 0.8 damage dealt times 2 damage taken or something like that. Or maybe do some extra fine tuning on the difficulty front to really find that good sweet spot, because it's really bad right now. Because for me, as a long-time Elder Scrolls fan, I thought, okay, master shouldn't be too hard, right? I've played Oblivion before. I started as such, but it was not a fun experience at all. So I moved it down to expert, but then ultimately after a good 10 hours, I settled it down to normal, because it just takes too long to kill stuff and you die too easily, and the gulf between adept and expert, as I said, is like me learning how to jump difficulty at points, where expert and master really feel like just crazy skydiving or bungee jumping off a cliff without the support. The funny part about this is how OP your minions become though if you use conjuration, because I think maybe they're either treated as enemies or just not treated as you, so they don't actually scale with the 0.6 or 0.2 multiplier, and I think they might actually scale with enemies with the 6 times damage and stuff like that multiplier, and they don't keep the downsides of taking 6 times damage. I'm pretty sure they just take the normal damage, because I used my normal skeleton summon and this guy carried me through an Oblivion gate on expert. It was doing insane damage, but when I moved down the difficulty to adept, he sucked again. So I don't know. Now, this is just a bonus section. This is not really a criticism or negative aspect of the remaster. It's more just a reminder for me, and of course you guys as well, because fundamentally this is not a remake at its core. It needs to stay the base Oblivion, even if base Oblivion may be inferior in certain aspects to what Oblivion's potential could be. Let me give an example of this. So the arena questline in Oblivion was supposed to be a much larger, a much more complex questline than what we got in the original Oblivion, with arenas in every city, and it was basically supposed to be a lot more than we got. If we were remaking Oblivion and having another go at it, that might be something that could be a change, that could have some staying power that makes the game better. But since this is a remaster, a lot of people have come to love the arena questline the way it is, myself included in a lot of ways. So if you changed it, you would alienate a whole group of people that liked how it used to be, and you would lose that nostalgia factor. There's a lot of other things like this too throughout the game that you can just see. Like, for me personally, I think imagine if this was a remake, they could do something a bit extra here. Like, for example, as well, the dungeons in Oblivion Remastered. All of the original Oblivion dungeons were done by one person or a much smaller team of people, I'm pretty sure. This could have been something in a remake that you could change and really redesign and retool each dungeon to be a unique experience instead of a lot of copy-paste asset work. Same with the Oblivion gates, which could have had a large amount of work done here, but are relatively the same with a few more crashes. Even with more aspects such as Radiant AI, which was largely scaled down, which now leads to the hilarious and unintended outcomes and AI for the NPCs. If real Radiant AI was properly retooled and completed, Oblivion may be the greatest RPG of all time. But again, it's not what people expect from a remaster. And none of this is any fault of Virtuous or Bethesda, by the way. It's just me explaining why this is a good faithful remaster for Oblivion, but it can never reach what Oblivion's full potential could be. And that's kind of why my score is the way it is in the conclusion. To wrap up this review of the Oblivion Remastered, I would say I recommend this, barring the two issues I mentioned earlier of the difficulty and the performance and bugs. Yes, if you're an Elder Scrolls fan and you really loved Oblivion and you want an excuse to jump back in, I would recommend this experience to you. If you're a new fan from Skyrim and perhaps always wanted to get into Oblivion but never really had the chance, or you've briefly dabbled but you could never get into it, while I think you would need to evaluate those core reasons why you jumped off of Oblivion before, perhaps. If it had something to do with the tone of Oblivion or something, you really can't do anything about that. But if it was more to do with the confusion or graphical thing, the remaster does a good job of rectifying that. The remaster is available on Game Pass, so unless you really want to go ahead and mod and you have a good PC, because I've heard mixed things about performance across PC, I'd recommend you try it on Game Pass, to be honest. It's $50, which is already reduced from the $70 slop we get. So trust me, Oblivion's 200 hours is way more fun than a lot of other AAA games I could talk about in recent memory, so it's more than worth the money in that regard. But if you want to save and only spend around £14, I would give it a month on Game Pass. Now onto the score, and again, this will be in comparison to original Oblivion, which I will just say now, I give the original a 9.4. Now, a little warning for first time viewers, I give scores differently than how others might. I don't have the belief that you can really give a universal score to games that everything can be rated by. So if I do choose to score games that are or will be part of a franchise or series of games, the score will be in context of those series of games, how well the game really fulfills its ultimate potential. For example's sake, again, Dark Souls 1 I might give a 9.3, Dark Souls 2 might be a 7.1 or something, but that doesn't mean that Dark Souls 2 is a 7 in comparison to other games. That's just in comparison to how I believe it reaches its ultimate potential. Of course, this is all subjective, you couldn't disagree, but ultimately this is how I like to review things. So with the original Oblivion, I believe it being a 9.4, I have to give Oblivion Remastered a simple bump to 9.5, or even 9.6 if they can stamp out the performance or bug issues and fix the difficulty. Again, it can never really be a 10 in my eyes. It's because of the fundamental things that are baked into Oblivion's as baggage, which hold back its potential. Maybe they'll do some sort of creation club adjacent thing, but that might just be up to them. That's it for this review, a shorter but important review I had to make. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you like, subscribe. We're going to be doing Assassin's Creed 1 as the next review that was supposed to come in for like 2 months, but this is the first review I'm making again, back to kind of making videos again. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you guys next time. Bye.